Back on record, and I want to apologize for the technical difficulties we had this morning. We lost our webcast at the end of the morning session, but I'm told that we'll get that information included.
Yes, it'll be included into the archive that we post on the board's website.
Okay, thank you. So let's pick up with agenda item number 16, discussion and possible board action for increase in exempt level of the executive officer. And I think we've got Mr. Castrillo here today.
Hello.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. Chris Castrillo with the Department of Consumer Affairs Deputy Director for Board and Bureau Services.
And so this is a good time to share the news that you shared with me about a month and a half ago regarding the exempt level of the executive officer. So in the past, we have had no for an answer to our requests, and this time the answer that we received was not a no. And so we received exempt level N. And when I first heard the news, excited that we didn't get a no, still concerned that the board would not have the ability to meet some of its goals that it had of maybe an assistant executive officer and some other things. But I'll let Mr. Castrillo and maybe Jason kind of chime in on what's happened since then.
Yeah, so thank you. So just for the board's awareness, the level increase for the physical therapy board was approved effective February 22nd. As the board president noted, the new exempt level is level N, resulted in roughly a 4.9% increase in Mr. Kaiser's salary, and then obviously has the program up at a higher salary band for term that we generally use. Board president had also referenced, with respect to the salary band increase, not just the executive officer's salary, but some larger visions for how the board and how Mr. Kaiser can move around some staff, restructure staff, and we've been engaging in conversations with our HR team, in addition to Jason, in terms of how are some ways that we can go about doing that. We met last week, and I think we had some positive conversations, and look forward to continuing to work with the board to make sure that you all can carry out the staffing needs that you see fit.
Nice.
Yes, the board's aware of, as a profession and as the regulation of this profession, the board's had a little bit of a growing pain, if you will. We haven't quite kept up with the licensing population and its size, and had, an in ratio or in proportion amount of staff to deal with that. And so one of the things that was holding us back a little bit is just the overall ceiling. And essentially, I guess that means me. But we've grown over time, from a very small board to a medium-sized board, and now to the larger, medium-large. So it's great news, and there's still some things we have to work out. Essentially, we couldn't fill any positions right now because, as the board's aware, I don't have any additional cubicle space in the small suite that we're kind of compacted into now. So, but again, it's optimistic. We have the necessary changes being made, and in the near future, we'll be looking for additional space, and that'll alleviate that issue. But this will allow for better structure when it comes to supervision of the individual units. And the ratio between the analysts and the clerical staff that we have, so we can get that into proportion as well. So,
Do board members have any questions or comments?
Can you remind us of what our initial request was for the EO augmentation?
Yeah, I believe it was level L.
Okay, and can you provide an explanation as to why we got to O?
Level N.
N, I'm
so don't I don't have a reasoning in terms of, right, it's basically a 2-level request that the board put forth, resulted in being a 1-level request. That was the response we got back from agency.
And while the approval to N does provide the board some relief in some of those issues with compaction and reporting issues, it doesn't really alleviate all of them. So it's something that we might have to address at a later date, collecting a little bit more data. I mean, as time goes on, the data becomes more and more convincing. The statistics are in our favor at that point. And so it might be a request that we make later on. But getting to N is a positive first step.
Absolutely. I would additionally just like to take a moment to commend Mr. Kaiser and express sincere appreciation to the staff for enduring the crowded space that they have, for agreeing essentially to take over a supply closet for cubicle space, emptying the supplies that were there and lining them up against the walls of the office space. So to have to make lemonade out of some really big lemons right now, I think is to be commended.
Thank you.
I have a question for either Jason or Mr. Castrillo. What other boards are at level N?
You know, I apologize. I don't have that information right in front of me at the moment.
I can fill in for you on that. Just
yeah.
from my research, especially when we were doing the request, there aren't any N's in the Department of Consumer Affairs. In our research, it did take us a while to find another N, and I did find an assistant deputy under the Department of Motor Vehicles that falls in that category. It's a unusual category. It's the only category that when it's considering its equivalent in civil service, you know, there's usually a specific role, and with this one, it's equivalent to an SSM 2/3. So that's probably why it hasn't been used for quite a while.
Thank you.
Any other board comments or questions?
Yeah, thank you for the level N and the 4.9%. The deal for me still remains. After all this time, we've asked for the request, and there was specific strategic reasons for why we asked for the request. The thing that troubles me, and it does trouble me, is that we don't know where to go beyond that. And I feel that some of the stuff that have shown up, will show up, is just the overall motivation. And the motivation of Mr. Kaiser and how we value them. We also want to have the department value him in the same way that we value him. And for me, I just feel like I want that next level. And that's a big ask, obviously, but I feel like someone has to ask for it. We want that next level so that we can strategically set up this board for success. I understand that everything works on the marginal play, but we have a bigger vision. And this may be the good first step, but for the board, as we move forward, I feel like we will need more complete answers. I don't feel like not knowing what the next deal is a good enough answer anymore, because we have sat on this for a while, you know, and my other board members may or may not agree with me, but I feel like to keep this board at this level of operation and our executive officer motivated and keep him motivating the board staff, we would have to show and demonstrate that we will meet him all the way. And even though the level N is like a place of, you know, it's like if there's the next one that you can't find it unless you do research, then I understand it's never been really done or considered, but let's fill it in because that's the way it works. So my request is, again, and it's very specific, I would really like to know who this board needs to speak to that actually made that decision. Why it was the end and not what we asked for. Because I want to understand that process. If that process is not transparent, then it's like someone is somewhere out there making a decision. And that's not acceptable. That's not acceptable. I don't want to accept that because I know that someone somewhere knows. And I would really, on behalf of the board, and I don't know, I was just speaking, I would like to know. I'm going to say, I would like to know who that person is and what we have to do to make that happen. I don't want to sit in a situation, and I want to be very clear, a little bit down the line, 3 months, 6 months, third board meeting down the line, and say, I saw the signs that an executive officer was in fear, losing his steam and want to put up a brave face because everybody is looking to him for leadership. If everybody's looking for him for leadership, then I'm going to look at the people that lead at a higher level for leadership. And I just really want those answers. And I'm willing to work collaboratively with you, with anybody, to find answers to these questions. Because it's like the mystery question. Whenever we get to this stage, it's the mystery question. I love solving mysteries. I don't want to be starry-eyed in the mystery. So I want to ask concrete questions and get some concrete answers. And even if the answer is, I genuinely don't know, there's a partnership there formed in that moment because we can explore it together. But for this board, our biggest concern is keeping the people that operate and work daily, moving papers, in this important task that they have to keep this board operating at an optimal level. I want to keep them motivated. And keeping them motivated means I keep their leadership motivated. And I don't want to fail them. I don't want to fail them. And sometimes when I'm here and I'm pushing, and maybe some of my board colleagues feel the same way, I'm pushing and we're working hard. We're raising our own levels to be better. And we come in and we run into this mysterious wall where no answers come from. And I just want to challenge that. That's my only deal. Long-winded, but that was my bottom line. I want to challenge that. And I mean that. So thank you for your time.
Absolutely.
Chris, thank you for coming back again today. I'm going to piggyback on what our Vice President Watkins just shared with us. I've been very vocal about this whole process and how much I don't like it. I feel like I've just been fed a spoonful of sugar, and the news that you brought is stuck somewhere in here. I agree. We need answers. And it sounds like, to me, somebody made a decision that, well, we'll just give them this, but not what we asked for. And we still didn't get an answer why we got the original no. So, can you take a message back and say, thank you, but this is not what we asked for? I'm not going to spend as much time as TJ, but I'm still an unhappy camper. I really am. And then for Dr. Drummer to have to commend these people who work really hard, and they are literally working out of a supply closet, shameful. It's shameful. And I'm halfway embarrassed that he had to thank them for doing that. We say we care about the public, but what about the workers who are going to make sure that this department runs the way that it's supposed to run so that the public can get what they expect from us. An N is okay, but that's not what we asked for. And so hopefully the next time we meet, we'll have a different conversation. And thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate your concern. I know your executive officer has been working with our department in terms of looking at space considerations. So I know that's been something that you all have looked at within your budget. With respect to the first level increase, my understanding that it wasn't a rejection, that it was a request to provide additional justification. I know the process took quite a bit of time, and you all put in quite a bit of work for it. With the subsequent information that was added to the justification, understanding that we didn't get to the level that you requested, do have to say I think this is the first level increase that I've seen go through and be approved since I've been here, albeit that being a very short period of time. I know you all have an upcoming EO evaluation on your next board meeting. Certainly welcome the opportunity for you all to go through that process, solicit additional information. If you do utilize staff in that process, particularly for the evaluation side, we'll work with you to make sure that there's the ability for staff to remain anonymous when they share their kind of feedback. But all along way of getting to there's additional routes for us to continue pushing. I hear you that you want to continue to push on this. I apologize that I don't have a clear answer for you on terms of what's the specific reason that it was level L and not level N, or excuse me, level N and not level L. That information doesn't always funnel its way down. I will tell you that with respect to the level increases in particular, that does require a lot more of a holistic look at where are the programs that are currently within DCA, what is the size, how long have these programs been around, what is their budget, what is their licensee population. So it could be a whole host of reasons, and again, it's not necessarily comforting to say I don't know exactly what it was that made it slot down from the level that you requested to the level that you got approved. And Vice President Watkins, I hear you, and I'm certainly interested in trying to add some clarity to this process that you all feel like doesn't have the amount of transparency that you'd like. So message understood. I do think this is still a positive for the board. We're going to continue our conversations with Mr. Kaiser to address the staffing needs. Obviously, the department stands willing and able to work with your executive officer and you all on addressing some of the space issues which have been raised, which have also been discussed. And of course, I'm always here to answer your questions when we work through your future evaluations and any other kind of increase requests you might put forward.
Just quick, again, thank you, Mr. Castillo, sincerely for coming before us again. Just emphasize, I guess, maybe paraphrase, I want to sort of take it up from where Ms. McMillan left us. And for me, it's really, we don't want to portray this, we need or we want this. It's not a reward, right? Although Mr. Kaiser and his staff certainly deserve to be rewarded. I mean, they've really gone above and beyond. But I believe you used the word need. So our mandate is really to protect the citizens of California. That is a need. So our request is not a reward for work well done above and beyond. It's really to try and function so that we can uphold our mandate to protect the public. And, you know, my question, I guess, I pose to you, but really to the larger department is what are you figuratively, right? What are you willing to live with and restrict the function of the board and still expect the board to carry out the mandate? Because that's kind of where we are. I think you've heard, pretty concrete examples of the sort of the closet situation and just the sort of the overworked, overstretched, and they still come with a happy smile on their face and they do good work. And again, it's not about the reward. It's really about trying to give them the appropriate resources to carry out their mandate.
Yeah, absolutely. So just speaking on behalf of the department, we stand we want to support the board in any way, shape, or form that we can. Understanding that these level increases, whether it's a level increase or just simply a salary increase, other things such as, other requests that might have, there's different layers of approval, where I don't want to just say it's out of the department's hands, but there is, with respect to these increases in particular, goes through agency, it goes through the governor's office, it goes through Cal HR, and that gets back to some of these questions that, without having a specific, clear answer for you in terms of why the one level. But on the department side, we certainly want to work with you all, and we certainly want to support you all. I think with respect to this level increase being approved, I would posit that there is a recognition of some need. It wasn't a rejection. I think we all are very much aware of the growth and expansion that this board has seen with respect to licensees, with respect to budget, obviously with your staff and your current space, right? I mean, whether it's physical or not, we've seen the growth of the board. I know it's not necessarily the reflection that was originally requested, but I do think that the approval is a reflection that this is a growing board, it's a growing population, and so there was a little bit of that approval in there. And then again, just to get back to what I sort of led with, and this kind of gets into larger conversations about what the board wants to do with staff and how the board wants to structure its staff, and our department, myself especially, we're more than welcome on working with you all, working with Jason, to control the things that we can control. I mean, there's certain aspects that are going to be within DCA's control, where I am more than confident that we're going to be able to try to deliver some positive outcomes for you. And that doesn't mean that the things that are not necessarily within DCA's house all the time, that we can't have positive outcomes, but it just does add another layer of difficulty. But rest assured that I hear you, I hear the frustration, and that, I do want to work with you on it.
Any other board comment?
I'm just hoping, I'm wondering if maybe you can just explain the process that this request took after it left our minutes. So where did that request go next? Is there a determination of support, or what are the next steps, and how does it proceed or not proceed?
Yeah, and I apologize because I think I came in after the first request had kind of initially been set up, but at some point the request had gone to agency, and agency felt that we wanted to add some additional justification into this package. So the package was sent down. I believe you all provided some additional information with respect to what are all the items that tell the story of growth that PTB has gone through. That was done. It was sent up. We do our approval process. It goes through myself, our chief deputy director, and the director, and then that goes up through agency. Agency has a approval process that I'm not privy to, but it does go through agency. They sign off to the governor's office, and then ultimately to Cal HR, who then implements the approval based on the effective date. So it did run through those various channels, then obviously came back as approved, in which we notified the board president and had a conversation about that.
Okay. Are you aware of when it left agency, what the approval level was? Was it for the request, for the O, or for the L request?
Yes.
So then, I'm sorry, the next step was, after it leaves agency, it goes to
Governor's office.
the governor's office and then HR?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So do we know when it left the governor's office where it was?
Do not.
Okay.
But I think what you're getting at is that when it left DCA, it was for the approval which you all had put forth, and at some point when it came back in approval, that it was one level below what you had requested, but approved.
2 levels below what was requested.
Yeah.
We requested L and we were given N. M apparently was skipped over.
We were at an
Sure.
O.
We were at O. We requested L.
Do the alphabet. Yeah, sorry. I don't mean to-
No.
Yeah, sure.
I'm looking at the data from our September, that was presented at our September meeting, when that ended up getting submitted. It was the fleshed out information that then got submitted with the request.
Correct.
And the level O at that time that that the executive officer was receiving was less than 3 boards that had level M, despite the fact that the PT board's budget was far greater than those other 3 boards. The number of positions was greater than all 3 of those other boards that were at M level, and the licensee population was more than 1/3 over what each of those other populations were. And they're all at M. So it's, the data is the data. The data doesn't lie. And so, yeah, still struggling with the idea of how can the data be reviewed and be essentially dismissed, and say, okay, we're going to throw them a little biscuit instead of a whole bone. It makes the process feel disingenuous. And in light of, we just had a presentation today about that focused on discipline aspects and the need for transparency within what we do. And to just tail on what Mr. Watkins had talked about earlier, the need for transparency for us is pretty strong. So thank you again for coming back and taking time for us.
I think, firstly, I'd like to thank, Mr. Castillo for coming. And also, I think it's important for the board to at least hear me acknowledge this, but I do feel from the department stance anyway, that support is there, right? I know that their willingness to help us when it comes to staffing issues and those kind of things, and even the negotiations with the space that we have, to the extent that they can, those services are being offered. So this, credit to Chris and his staff, and DCA staff that helps us in any other aspect when it comes to these specific problems, that willingness to provide those services to us is obvious to me.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for that. Any other further board comment or discussion? Dr. Alviso? Before you leave, did you want to?
Well, public comment on
Okay.
this item.
Any public comment on this item?
And
Okay.
then before,
You don't get to go yet, Chris.
Okay.
so.
Turn that on.
I think-
Okay. So we're going to go back, while we have Mr. Castrillo, to agenda item number 18, and make it an 18B, and just kind of make that an open session item for the moment.
Make it an open session item to the extent we're talking about the evaluation of the EO generally. And I think just a small clarification about that process was going to be made. And I just want to remind the board that we're talking about the process of the EO evaluation and not Mr. Kaiser specifically. So we're not going to, there isn't going to be any, shouldn't be any discussion about Mr. Kaiser or his performance.
Okay. So where's the conversation going?
I think if Mr. Castrillo had anything about
Sure. Yeah, e-evaluation process. I alluded to it when we were discussing the last item, right? You have the EO evaluation coming up, your next board meeting. Talked about avenues for opportunities for you all to put forth different sort of level increase or EO evaluation salary increase. With respect to process, our office provides the EO evaluation forms to all the board members, board leadership. If you want to do sort of any staff kind of feedback, all we'd ask is that you would work with our office to set up a way that makes sure that staff would be able to provide that feedback anonymously. I think that'd be the only sort of item that we'd want to make sure that we clarify for you all.
And, we've talked with Mr. Castrillo, and legal will be working with his office to figure out a way to administer the logistics of obtaining staff feedback, stakeholder feedback, instead of using kind of a board member calling process for staff members and stakeholders. We'd want to try and ensure the process and emphasize anonymity for the persons providing feedback. And so looking into other avenues, like one idea that was thrown around was, doing anonymous Survey Monkey type results. So I just wanted to take the opportunity to reassure you that we would be working with Mr. Castrillo's office to work on the logistics.
Any board discussion? Any public comment? Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, and just wanted to say congratulations and thank you to Deborah. For a moment, I thought I was at a CSAC meeting, but appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Okay. All right, let's move on to agenda item number 22, Administrative Services Report.
So we have Mr. Nelson and representatives from the Department of Consumer Affairs Budget Services. If you'll introduce yourself, please.
I'm Carl Nelson. I'm the budget liaison to DCA for the board.
Robert Delestreas, DCA budget manager for the board.
Carl Bierman, DCA budget analyst for the board.
Okay. I just wanted to point out a couple of things about my briefing paper. There were just a couple of corrections. Notice that our budget authority this year, we forgot to subtract reimbursements from $5,082,000 in paragraph 2. And when we do that, our actual budget authority becomes $4,983,000. And then in paragraph 4, the operating expenses and equipment also forgot to take out the reimbursements there. So our actual budget for operating expenses and equipment is $2,944,000. I don't really have anything else. If anyone has any questions,
I have a question for you, Carl. In paragraph 4, you mentioned that the most significant decrease is the DUI budget. And I was wondering if that's due to less disciplinary cases, or what was the rationalization there on that?
So the DFI budget is, I think
Yeah.
Robert can explain.
I'll just jump in. So the DFI budget, it's based on investigative hours that we track for DFI. So in logic, if you just take it from that perspective, the board has become less reliant on utilizing peace officers for their cases. So it could be attributed to a number of things, and I could defer to Jason to correct me, but it could be one that the board found deficiencies in their enforcement unit to settle either administratively or to how they evaluate their cases. 2, it could be that there is an anomaly year and cases aren't appearing as they were in the past,
Less
where
egregious.
Exactly, less egregious, to where I know from my experience with the board that we had to increase our aging line item for the last 3 years, going through current year avenues to augment your budget, as well as going through the BCP process to increase your budget for it. But with that said, I'll defer to Jason to add more to that.
It's actually based on a couple of different factors. One, we have seen a significant decrease in the number of complaints received. And then that kind of trickles down from there, the level of egregiousness of the case, the complexity. Some of them can be dealt with in-house before a sworn investigator is required. So it's a couple different factors. And then this line item in particular is a little awkward because it's run on a 2-year roll forward method. So what we're actually being charged is related to services we received 2 years ago. So as we move forward and as those efficiencies are realized, you will see less of an expenditure represented in the report, and even at some point, potentially, a credit to be received, because while we were budgeted a certain amount, we under-expended it by quite a bit, and so it rolls forward into the next year. So, but really the driving force is the decrease in the number of complaints received at this point. That's not to say that it won't change next year, right? I mean, there's no predicting the enforcement program. That much is certain. So,
Thank you.
Any other board comment or questions? Anything?
well, one thing I wanted to highlight and why I asked DCA to be here today is our reliance on the Fiscal system and an update as to where that system is. Normally with CalSTARS, we would have the ability to create fairly accurate reports based on data. But because we're transitioning to this new enterprise system, Fiscal, and not just DCA, but about 90% of the state of California for that matter, Fiscal has a little bit of a backlog, and I asked, Mr. De Los Reyes to come and kind of explain that process a little bit. I know that for me as the administrator and responsible for the funds of this program, it leaves me with a little bit of anxiety sometimes because while we can do what we can to track in-house, there's always that unknown. There's
Absolutely.
always that, did that check get cashed or did it not get cashed at this point? So I'll let Robert elaborate.
Absolutely. So to Jason's point, we transitioned to the new accounting system this fiscal year. Just want to assure the board that the system is working, but the new system does bring its level of sophistication and a higher level of transparency that does require a larger learning curve that from a day-to-day basis that we're still learning the new system. But with that said, I'm pleased to update the board that we are closing fiscal month 2 and 3. I know we're significantly behind and backlogged, but it sounds like a major hurdle was cleared in our accounting office that looks like we're going to start closing these fiscal months. And it's anticipated that we're going to be all caught up end of April. So that's good. But with absent those reports, I also want to point out that we have been tracking the spending of the board. Again, not to the level that you receive reports monthly, but we do have the ability to manually go into the system and extract the data for the board to kind of keep Jason and the company apprised to what they're spending each year. So with that said, we also track information outside of the Fiscal system, which is we have HR reports that we can rely on to see how much they're spending in regards to their payroll and their benefits. We also have Attorney General costs and OAH costs, Office of Administrative Hearings, that we receive from those entities each month, so we can track that separate outside of the system. With all that said, those spending or expenses make up a large portion of the board's budget. So rest assured that we do have a good pulse on your budget and no danger in blowing it or any surprises in fiscal year end. So pleased to say that.
I'm happy to hear that. But to be clear, so the reporting that we received from Fiscal thus far, we have fiscal month 1, July of last year, and August and September are closing out or are completed?
We completed in regards to we reconciled the reports and cleared, as how I understand it from a layman's point of view, milestones or checkpoints that need to be cleared to be accepted by the state controller's office. That's the control agency that our accounting folks report to. However, with all that said, we do report information. We have reported figures to the board for fiscal month 6, which is represented in Carl's report. And we do have updated numbers for this month through February, which is fiscal month 8, to kind of give you a good pulse on what you've spent so far and what you're projected to save and collect in regards to your revenue. So,
And I only ask those questions just to draw the attention to the board that, as Robert alluded to, that reconciliation that occur through those reports might affect the data that we have reported for this month. Thus, so when the actual data is completed and all the reconciliation is done, you might see a variance in the next board meeting's report materials or the board meeting after that, for that matter. So just to explain that variance, because
That's
you
a good
guys are
point.
sharp, you'll come across it and you'll ask.
So you said you do tracking on other programs outside of the Fiscal?
we have information that we track in-house that would be recorded as a cost in the Fiscal system, but we have reports like HR reports that we could receive in regards to payroll. The Attorney General also sends us monthly billings for our clients that we can track and manually input to kind of keep track of what the board spent till year to date and project out kind of what they would spend at the end of the fiscal year. So from that perspective, yeah, we have information we could receive outside the system that we essentially created a workaround to help you guys, to ensure that you guys have a pulse on what you guys spend each year or spend this year. But we're optimistic that that's just a workaround, and the reports will again be enhanced to have that be disseminated on a monthly basis, much more detail, and definitely an improvement from the old system.
And from my perspective, we really appreciate that workaround. We realize how much work was entailed to make that happen.
Absolutely.
And it's essentially our guideline at this point until Fiscal is up and running and that reporting part of the software is working effectively and the reconciliations are happening. So we thank DC. I'm sure they were probably tired of us ringing their phone, and so that was the only thing they could get us, off the phone with, but we really appreciate it.
And we're happy to assist the board and Jason and all the rest of the staff. It's a pleasure working with them.
Thank you.
This question is for you, Jason. I see in Carl's memo that staff is not projecting major changes in expenditures this year. Is the anticipated move in the next fiscal year, or is that still being worked out?
That's still being worked out. But essentially, even if it happens this year, if you remember, we put a good portion of money into a revolving architectural fund. Essentially, any reversion from last year, to the extent that we could, I think we maxed it out, we put into a fund to set aside, a rainy day fund specifically for a move, whether that is the cost of moving itself or the cost of build out or anything like that. So having that set aside, even if it happened today, it wouldn't have an impact on our existing budget. So we do anticipate that being a potential again moving forward this year, that if we end up moving second part of next year, that if our numbers are correct, we think we'll have a reversion again this year that we'll also deposit into the architectural revolving fund to supplement it that much more.
By next year, do you mean next fiscal year or next calendar year?
Either or. So
Okay.
if it's just after January 1st or after July 1st, I mean, at this point, we're really hoping with the negotiation of the lease on this building that we can get a move done at least within the first final quarter of this fiscal year.
Any other board discussion or questions or comments? Do we have any public comment? Thank you, Carl, and thank you, Robin Carl.
Thank you.
Next, we have outreach.
I'll have the board welcome our newest member to the team, Alicia Miller, who is, her official title is the Outreach Liaison for the Physical Therapy Board of California. And she has some statistics to share with you.
Welcome.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm Alicia Miller. I'll be presenting our outreach statistics for our second quarter. based off of our website and our Facebook. For the website, I compared our second quarter from this fiscal year compared to last fiscal year, and the website had an overall decrease of 5%. And for our Facebook page, I compared this second quarter, or this fiscal year second quarter, compared to second quarter from last fiscal year, and there was an overall decrease of 60%. So I did some little research, and second quarter this fiscal year, Facebook only had 20 posts. Compared to last fiscal year, there was 75 posts. So we're hoping to increase posts to increase the visitors. And I also wanted to note that we are going to be adding a couple more information to our briefing paper for the next meeting. We're going to include our outreach presentations that Mr. Kaiser and I attend, and to present to the schools. And then we're also going to add the number of CAPD accredited PT and PTA schools. And then lastly, I did notice there was a typo on page 48. It says HITS with a C at the end of it, so I just wanted to note that. And then that's it. Any questions or comments?
In addition, maybe, so
Oh, yeah.
in that new briefing paper format where we'll be including our outreach to schools and attendance with the association and the like, we would be, like if it was presented today, we would be able to add, as an example, our presence at Student Conclave, where I was not able to attend, but Dr. Dominguez here was kind enough to serve as my replacement. And in doing so, more geographically located to where Conclave was, so it really kind of worked out, and it kind of gave me this idea that I should shame the rest of you as members into that same kind of level of participation. But I've also gotten positive feedback that, you know, as members and having that opportunity, you provide a whole nother perspective to those future licensees. And I would encourage you, when you can, and if you were willing to volunteer, I'd find something for you to do, or a school to go to, or go together. But again, I can provide a layer of my observations from my perspective, but as a board member, it's a whole new element for them to understand. And don't be afraid, you know, if we put you in that position, you're not expected to know all the answers. It really is from your perspective as a board member. And I think we made a successful showing at Conclave. I tried to prepare Dr. Dominguez with my materials as best I could. And I've been told that he presents it better than I do. So, having said that, I think a trial run with a couple of the other members is, you know, something that we should look into in the future.
So, thank you, Jason, for for giving me the opportunity. And my dear colleagues, actually, it was very fun and quite enjoyable. I'm not sure about me being able to deliver the material like Mr. Kaiser could have. I certainly tried to do my best, but you know, we had about 55, 60 students in there, so they had 4 concurrent sessions at each hour-ish block. So I think I drew about a quarter of the attendance, so not too bad. And really, the only comment I would say is that because we made such a late switch, the topic still was billed as how to prepare for the licensing exam, and that's not quite what I presented. So after losing 5 students immediately, after I confessed them that I wouldn't be doing that, you know, about 50 or so remain. So we got to talk a bit about the history of PT, the history of the board, my role as a board member, and it had some pretty good questions generated, and some of the issues that, like on the ledge rundown by Ms. Conley yesterday, in particular the athletic training licensing bill that's on the docket now. I had a student, a third-year DPT student who also happens to be an ATC, sort of posed the question, what should I do? Which way should I be leaning? I'm an ATC, but I'm also going to be DPT, and I think I politically stayed out of the, you know, the embroiled discussion, but Dave Powers was there and added his 2 cents. So, but yeah, overall, thanks for allowing me to do that.
Not at all. I
Thank
think,
you for doing that.
Yep.
Yeah.
but I think Conclave is one of those opportunities that we've managed to take advantage of now twice, well, 3 times actually. But we could take advantage of it more, right? So while there were concurrent sessions, typically in my experience, and Dr. Dominguez is his experience, we only got to serve as one portion, one class in an early morning. But if there were a few more of us there, for Conclave in particular, where students are traveling from schools all over the state of California, that we could represent in each section of that, in all 4 sections of those presentations. So I don't think next year is going to be an opportunity, though, because from what I understand, CPTA is putting together a conclave and an annual assembly that might occur in Las Vegas in conjunction with Arizona and Nevada. So
I'll go.
So that might make it hard for us to do. But if Conclave doesn't do that, and Conclave is central in California, I'll be calling you.
Yeah. Thanks for representing us, Dr. Dominguez.
My pleasure.
Yes.
I'd also like to point out that while it's not represented in the statistics yet because of when Alicia came on, I think, what she had said earlier about the number of posts from last quarter to this quarter, in this quarter alone, she's beat the number of posts of last year in totality, right? So the content's already there, along with some, progress in the rebranding of our social media materials and printed materials and those kind of things. So a lot of work has already been done, but also in progress and on the way. So we look forward to that. Excellent.
Thank you.
Alicia, we're very happy to have you.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
I'll let you know that I went to a consortium meeting in December, and one of the physical therapists said, "What's going on with the board? I've seen a lot of posts on Facebook lately." So it's being noticed.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I'm glad.
I think one of the things that's missing from the outreach report is the progress notes that came out
Yes.
recently. And I wanted to find out, was that sent out by email, and how did that work? Because I know there was some concern how the email list was going to function.
Yeah, we did send it out digitally too, and we utilized the library of emails that we've built since the requirement was put into place. Right around 26,000 emails, which is a pretty good number considering, we're close to, 40,000 licensees in total that are potential receivers of that material. So we did send it out to 26. We found maybe a little bit more than 10% in error, right? So we received about a 3,000 bounce back. We're dealing with that now, and we're trying to determine, one, if we have the resources to monitor that list and do anything with it, right? But we do have that material to our avail. But that pilot of using that mechanic to send it out in that electronic format seems to have worked really well. And we're looking at other ways to utilize it. We did use it for our survey for the strategic plan, and again, about the same response. So moving forward, that's going to be the digital delivery method for future newsletters, but also for important updates like regulations and statutes and that kind of thing.
I just wanted to say I thought that the presentation of it, both in print and digitally, is really nice. It's very, very good. No, I didn't like my picture.
We had an excellent designer from DCA's Publications Design and Editing, and a lot of help from them, and then staff and their contributions. There are a couple articles, but again, moving forward, and I'm just, because it's opportune, we are always in dire need of content. So if there is an article that a board member has always wanted to write, because I know that's, then please take a stab at it. We will have to provide it to legal for review and even to a proofreader or a proofreader at PD&E. So don't be, offended if we come back with any kind of recommended changes. I wasn't when they did it to me. So again, moving forward, the content is probably one of the most difficult things to put together. The design, it is just the first part of a series they designed for us. So one of the things you'll look at is while it had very fall and winter kind of colors. You'll see a similar design, but because the next newsletter is spring, it's a little bit more springy. So
The next newsletter's spring,
it is
next spring?
this spring. This spring. And what we're doing right now is putting together, it's a little bit lighter than the one we did. The one we did was kind of farther apart from the last publication, so we had a lot of content to bring people up to date. The one that we're putting together right now for publication next month is lighter. You know, you'll see some articles that are still relevant when it comes to advice that we want to give to licensees, but also the discipline from the last time the newsletter was printed, and a new feature of all the licenses that were issued since the last time the newsletter was printed. Start with a positive note instead of concentrating on the negative.
Nice.
Are we able to monitor click-through? So when somebody clicks on an aspect of the newsletter to see if they're picking certain topics or if they're moving certain ways within the newsletter?
So the digital format of the newsletter does have hyperlinks in it. The one click-through that we're able to measure is when they come to the website and access the newsletter directly. But the emails that I've sent out to licensees, their navigation inside of the document internally, it's going to be difficult for us in Google Analytics to discern the difference between them just typing that hyperlink in or clicking on that PDF hyperlink from within our document.
So I'm wondering, just a thought, rather than just the pure PDF document, to look at more of a hyperlinked web page document that could then potentially be able to help us to track those different topics, which may help us to steer conversation or content in the future.
Yeah, I was kind of wondering, you know, the newsletter's meant to be a unidirectional message sent out, but getting feedback is really important.
And just thinking of other things that I get through email, even advertisements from different businesses, that when the email opens up, there's hyperlinks at different places to go to different areas of the store, of the online store.
Yeah.
So then they target me because I went to look at shoes. So now all of my web pages have advertisements for shoes on them, whether I want shoes or not, if I accidentally clicked the wrong thing. But to be able to track, I know that they track that information. So for consumers, so I'm wondering if we might have similar capacity for adjusting what we're producing.
I can tell you with the technology that we're utilizing now, no. But I think, you know, it's my expressed intent that moving forward, you know, I will employ any kind of new technology that I can find that provides us that kind of benefit. The one that, for lack of a better term, the email blast software that we're using right now is essentially an old listserv system. And so while it works, and maybe not for its intended use, but it works for what we need it to do, trying to keep an eye out on the horizon for software that might be able to provide that kind of functionality is definitely something we'll be doing.
I think the FSBPT newsletter that
That's
gets,
the best example.
You can click right on it. I think as far as getting some board members to contribute articles to the newsletter, it's been very helpful when staff has given me the topic. So if I know that we can also come up with our own topics, but if you're not getting volunteers or time is passing, I think when we've been asked to write about our testing day and reminisce about that, it was easy to know what we were going to write about. So if you come up with things and then solicit us, that could be helpful as well.
Sure.
Yeah. Any other board comments or discussion on outreach?
Briefly, yesterday I was asked the question about whether or not publishing highlights directly after a meeting would require a board vote. and I have since looked into that, and no, it wouldn't really require a board vote because they're not minutes. It would be more akin to like a newsletter or an outreach item that falls in the purview of the executive officers and the staff's functions to do outreach. And I think, to the extent it just provides kind of highlights about, hey, here's what the board's done. It doesn't go, it wouldn't, be the same as minutes, which are much more detailed, shows board voting, who said what, that kind of thing. So I just wanted to, provide that answer I was asked yesterday.
Yeah, that's helpful. Any public comment on outreach? Thank you, Alicia.
Thank you.
We were going to do it at the end once we go through these things here.
Okay, I was just thinking about, because I think Maureen or Kurt were going to sit in, but I think, we could do it.
Okay. Hello.
Excuse me.
Hi. Is
Sarah
this-
Conley, Manager of Applications and Licensing. Madam President, I have a request.
Yes.
If I may?
Yes.
Can the board take up agenda item 24B and then just 24 licensing?
24B?
Yeah. And then to follow that, 24 licensing report.
What's 24B?
Continuing competency?
Oh, I have that as 24A.
Oh, I apologize. 24A.
24A?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going
Yes.
to have Veronica and Yasha, who are presenting, they're going to come up.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, board members.
Hello.
I'm Veronica Gutierrez, analyst with the Continuing Competency Program.
Good afternoon, and I'm Yasha, analyst for the Continuing Competency Unit. I work with Veronica.
All right, so we continue to conduct quarterly audits of the, and a random selection of the eligible renewing population continues to be selected. For quarter one, July through September of fiscal year 2017-2018, there were 146 PT selected and 45 for physical therapist assistants. Those are currently being worked on, and hopefully we'll have results at our next meeting. Although we do make all efforts to complete the audits. A little bit more? Okay. So although we make all efforts to complete the audits at the end of each quarter, there's factors outside of our control that prevent us from completing those. So we'll have numbers for those at our next board meeting. However, we have completed quarter 4, and that's April through June of fiscal year 2016-2017. And at the end of quarter 4, there was an 88 passing rate for PTs and a 90% rate for PTAs. That's a 5% drop in compliance rate in comparison to quarter 3. And each case varies from case to case, but for failing the audit, one of the most common ones is for not responding to our audit requests. We make all efforts to try to reach the licensee via phone, via email, whichever way possible. However, if we don't receive a response, then unfortunately they're failed, and then they're sent over to the Consumer Protections Unit. We have also finalized updating the Recognized Approval Agencies page on our website. That page will now identify those agencies that offer a life support course for healthcare professionals and those that offer an ethics, laws, and regulations course. So hopefully the licensees will find that information helpful. And I'll send it over to Yash.
Okay. So I just wanted to go over the record compliance template. Our unit has finally concluded its data collection for the approval agencies. The types of data that we collected are who the approval agencies are, if they're still offering courses for California. We confirmed their contact information or gathered new information if the agency is under new ownership or management. A list of their approved courses and their approved providers. And we request that the agencies continually update us with their courses and providers as they implement them. After we collected all their data, we house that information in what we call the Record Compliance Template, or RCT. That helps us to conduct our quarterly audits. So that information is used to confirm the information that the licensees give us and make sure that it matches what the agencies also give us. So it's like a stare and compare. We currently have 135 recognized approval agencies. That's 8 less than the last 2 quarters. And we have approximately 14,465 approved courses that those agencies and providers offer. Let's see. There are for the agencies that we have that have been their recognition have been removed or we have brought before the board for removal. We have done made an extensive effort to communicate with those agencies. So those ones that have been removed or were asking us because they either no longer exist or they're not responding to our communication or they have requested to be withdrawn, their recognition to be withdrawn. So for the next board meeting coming up in July, there is approximately 10 will be asking again for removal, 3 for termination because we could not communicate with them, and about 7 who was asking to be withdrawn, their recognition to be withdrawn. Also going forward for the new fiscal year, we're looking to audit the approval agencies now that we've concluded collecting that data. We want to now audit things that we're going to be looking for is that each agency has a procedure for periodic review of courses to ensure content quality and currency. That the agencies have the capacity to evaluate each course offered by a provider in accordance with Section 1399.96 A through J. That's the standards for the approval agencies. So that they are also conducting audits of at least 10% of its approved provider courses to ensure compliance with the article. So I think that's what we have now. Are there any questions?
Yeah, so being a public member on the board, you said that there are some agencies who ask to be removed. Because I don't know, what would be one of the common reasons that an agency would ask?
Because some of them are not offering courses for California anymore. They have sold their businesses. A lot of them are offering courses for other states, but not California. So, or they've sold their business, new management, and they're no longer offering courses. So they're asking to be withdrawn, their recognition to be withdrawn.
In the early days of the regulation being effective, we saw a lot of applications for recognized approval agencies. And I think almost as kind of in a race fashion, I mean, once that industry was created based on that regulation, they filled that vacuum rather quickly. Now, having been doing it for a number of years and understanding that it's actually a lot of work, that they've come to the conclusion that they no longer want to be a recognized approval agency, especially with the audits looming out there waiting for them. So they've asked for their recognition to be removed. We've come across them in the audit process itself. If a licensee has said they've attended a course or but they couldn't get proof of completion of that course, they're required to keep that record for 5 years. But if they lose it, we required through regulation that the recognized approval agencies kept it for 7. And so we sometimes try to help out the licensee and reach out to the approval agency and say, we need proof of attendance for this particular course for this person. And in doing that, sometimes we hear that, that number is no longer in service, and and so those are the folks that that through running across, but now through the audit process that we may be going through, that 130 some odd that we have, that number might dwindle a little bit because there might be some out there that we don't even know are not in business anymore.
I agree with Jason, and even when trying to collect this data, some of them are just like, I am too busy to do this. I'm too busy to give you this information, and I don't have time for this. So I think, what he's saying is true as far as racing to get, approved to be a recognized agency, not realizing all that it entails, what is asked of them, So I'm enjoying that some of them want to give up their recognition.
And there is one member on this panel who remembers conversations pertaining to this, but one of the reasons for that is while we have the authority to charge a fee for recognized approval agencies in statute, we haven't wrote a regulation or established a format, if you will, a structure of how that fees would look. It's something that we'll definitely have to look at moving forward because continuing competency was something that was assigned to me when I first came to the board. And my vision at the time, not knowing even what I know now, I understood that that unit could stand alone on its own and require a number of personnel to sustain it. And it would need funding. And right now, we're absorbing it, right? The statute's intent was to make it fund itself. And so it was also the intent of the legislature, at the direction of this board, to not have that funding come from the licensing population itself, not burden them with that cost, but pass that cost on to those that are benefiting from it in the recognized approval agencies because it's a new business. So it's something that's still on the radar. We still have to do some research and looking at it because you could simply, write a regulation that each recognized approval agency fills out an application fee, but it's much more complex than that. You have the differences between a large organization providing thousands of courses, which really is the brunt of the work that our staff does, and then a few, mom and pop shops, if you will, that might offer a few, less courses, and it's not exactly in proportion to charge them the same fee.
Jason, as a side note, you guys are incredible. I mean, not only have you absorbed extra work, you said earlier you work off a listserv that's outdated and you're making it work. Your staff is working out of small spaces and you make it work. And what you ladies are doing is the effectiveness of what you're doing. You're keeping everything current. As a side note, you guys are amazing.
Thank you.
And thank you.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask, I don't know that you would know this, but once you start auditing the companies, I'm just wondering if they're not in compliance, is there something that we provide them with to kind of guide them into creating some policies for themselves or?
We have opportunity here, right? So it's really the continuing competency program at this point is still in its infancy. That's undiscovered territory at this point. When we conduct those audits, I think in the early stages, participation of the companies themselves will kind of dictate, some of the choices that we have to make. How compliant are they willing to be? How, what will we have to do to get them to adhere to the regulation and the agreement and the application that they signed to do these things? Does that mean removing their recognition, which staff has brought requests to remove recognition to this board before? Is there an opportunity for them to come into compliance? And then, after a certain amount of time, we'll take it as a case by case at first, and then over time, establish best practices. So, but I think part of it is until we establish what the service is worth and what we actually have to recoup in cost for the program to pay for itself, that is also a variable that needs to be considered in that discussion of what discipline looks like for a recognized approval agency. And I say discipline not in the means of an administrative process, but whether or not we allow them to continue to be a recognized approval agency when they don't follow California regulations.
I have a question as far as process is concerned on the licensee's end. Should they receive a letter that they're being audited, what would be the consequences if they were not compliant once they're audited? And then to build on top of that, what options do they have to bring themselves into compliance?
So we definitely try to work with them, give them an opportunity to come into compliance. And If they don't, then that's where they're forwarded on to the Consumer Protections Unit. But they initially are given that opportunity to come into compliance.
So they get like an extension to
We do
fulfill
give
the
them,
hours.
well, we do send out an deficiency letter. We let them know what it is that's deficient and give them ample time to complete that. But
So essentially, if they respond, you'll work with them.
Right.
It's
We try to
only when they
educate
ignore
them.
the request, then things escalate. Okay.
At this stage, and then and while staff will work with them, and that's a lot of work and hard work in and of itself. They do find their way to me by means of a recommendation from the Continuing Competency Unit, because while staff may have been willing to work with them, they weren't willing to work at a reasonable rate. You know, they were offered quite a lifeline and they didn't take it, and then they get to me. So sometimes that's going to happen, you know, but on a case-by-case basis, I'll say because of the, and again, I'll say the youth of this particular regulation, even though it's been in effect for a number of years, the audit process, you know, while we did it right away in the beginning, it staled out. You know, resources wouldn't allow us to conduct audits for quite a while. So we're almost restarting the campaign. And so that's where that compliance comes into play. We're hoping that is a word of mouth campaign in and of itself, that I got audited, and here was what was wrong. And man, when I didn't do what I needed to do, I got a citation in the mail. You know, so I've only ever had a few cases that their lack of compliance and continuing competency led to an administrative action at the disciplinary level. Very few.
And how is the percentage of licensees chosen? Is it like a lottery style, random?
It's a sufficient compliance from formula. So you start off with a baseline. You look at your data as it's moving. And as an example here, right now, what's the sample rate right now?
10%.
So at 10%, there's a number of numbers here that would lead me to say that it's time to lower the sample rate, right? So at 10%, you have such a significant number of your auditees passing the audit that you can lower the rate. If we move to 5, and the one thing that I do want to kind of emphasize on this group is even the 5% variance from one quarter to another, I think is completely natural. It's a random selection of a list, and you might get a list where it's 40%. You know, it's just the luck of the draw, if you will. Mm-hmm. But once we look at that, we'll determine if it's a really low pass rate, it's time for us to up the next sample rate for the next audit group.
And if you're audited in this quarter, is it like jury duty? You're good for a year?
Audited at any time. No, unfortunately not. I mean, it's not the board's intent to pick on somebody and audit them 3 times in a row. Unfortunately, it's hard for us to police that in the list, especially with Breeze. But it is something that we've tried to, we're looking at is adding functionality. But I think you guys understand adding functionality to Breeze is a very long, arduous process. But there's something to say for auditing 2 years in a row. You know, I mean, when it comes to statistics and collecting numbers and determining whether or not this has an effect, some audits will actually intentionally take a small percentage of the previous audit group and audit them again to see if it's established a baseline, if it has an effect. And so I think I've had, from what I can recall, maybe 1 or 2 people that have been audited twice. In that regard, it was when we first started the program, and then after the long absence, they've been audited again. But we try not to control that list at all. We try to leave that random selection of those that are eligible strictly to the random number generator. They won the lottery ticket at that point.
Your presentation today made me think that the continuing competency audit, that process might be a really good thing for the newsletter.
Yeah.
And it might even start from the standpoint of what it means when you check the box in Breeze, or what it means when you check that box on your paper renewal, and how that trails through what's going to be your process, and the fact that if you get something, you should really respond to it. Mm-hmm. And what happens with that response. I think it just might be, it's kind of time for that. So
So Alicia was saying that when we have those ideas, that we should reach out to board members and assign those topics to that board.
I want to say that was Katerina's idea.
Thank
Oh.
you. Always volunteering me.
Duly noted.
I just want to clarify what I heard, that if I were selected for audit in quarter one, I could potentially again be selected for audit in quarter two, random generation, and quarter three, all within the same licensing cycle. My license was, I was deemed that I was current with my continuing competence
Not
at
with
quarter one. And then again, if I've already established that at quarter
Right.
one and my license isn't, still in the same licensing cycle, can I
No.
be select?
No, not within the same renewal period, right?
Not
So
within.
for separate renewal periods, yes,
Thank
but
you.
not audited twice for
Not
the
for the
same
same
renewal
renewal
period.
period.
No.
So in one renewal period, then I'm blanked out from being selected for audit again. Okay.
Dr. Drummer, you will not be audited again until your next renewal period.
I appreciate that. I hope that that's the same for the rest
No,
of
it
my
is. Yeah.
licensee.
I just don't want licensees to misunderstand that, once they've been audited and then a couple of years goes by, another renewal period, we'll be looking at that next renewal period and you potentially could be selected for that as well.
Thank you.
Any further board comment or discussion? Is there any public comment? Veronica and Yasha, thank you for your diligent work and your presentation.
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Madam President, if we could
Yes.
take a small break.
Yep, it's 2:21. We've got a lot still left. We can go 5 minutes? Okay,
A 5-minute break.
okay.
I'm Sarah Conley. I'm the manager of the Applications and Licensing Services Programs. And at the board's request from the last meeting, I'm going to present on the application process. The request was actually really timely because we've had the opportunity to capitalize on some efficiencies with our process, which is really important. And you saw in your materials that we are kind of hitting a wall with our workload. So we had to look at either doing something, some major changes with either the process or personnel. And so we had the opportunity to look at our processes. So I'm going to show you that today. And the board knows this, obviously, but for those watching or stakeholders, I just want to talk about, what's the point of the application process? Maybe. Hang on. There we go. The whole reason for the application process is consumer protection. The applications program is the first line of defense in this, the bouncer at the door, so to speak, making sure that applicants are minimally competent and safe to practice and to be exposed to consumers. And so how is that done? I want to go over a couple more things. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I guess I'm not.
They can don't hear you back. It's on.
Can you hear me better now? Okay. So, sorry, I'm trying to manage all my equipment here. Okay. So all of the application requirements are outlined in law and regulation. So all the policies and procedures that we have stem from the laws and regulations established by the legislature, or in the case of a regulation, the board. An important aspect of the application process is that it is singular. You'll hear me say application process, but there's actually two parts. It's application for examination eligibility and application for licensure. Some boards actually have two separate application processes. You apply for examination, you complete that process, and then you apply for licensure. This board combined those two things into one process. And I think that provides both the board as well as the applicants some efficiency in streamlining those requirements. Another aspect of the process is that there are various parties involved in the application process. When an applicant is applying to the board, it's not just the board and not just between the board and the applicant. There are other parties involved, such as the Federation, the testing centers for taking the exam, schools, and DOJ and FBI for fingerprinting background checks. As you'll see under the Federation of State Boards, there is FSBPT or Federation. In doing one of the outreach presentations, it was funny. I laughed out loud because going over all of the different acronyms that the applicants have to know or be aware of, there were so many. We went FSBPT, MPTE, CLE, CAPT, DOJ, FBI, PTBC, and for the applicants, they're trying to learn this process to figure out what to do. And unfortunately, you're getting caught up in the acronyms and what do they all mean. So we're trying to make this information easier to digest, more accessible. So I'm trying to do that here as well. So the application, what is the application process? What does it mean and how long does it take? So the first part is the mail desk. Obviously, if a paper application is sent in, it has to go through the mail desk to be sorted. And then it has to go to cashiering. Now, these are both administrative tasks, but they're important to include here for processing time because that's something that everyone wants to know about. What's the processing time? Why is it taking so long? What's happening? And these are things that have to happen before the application program can get it.
So are these pieces within our office?
Yes. Well, the mail, receiving the mail is, and then our initial cashiering process, the conclusion of the cashiering is actually done through DCA, the accounting department. So it's entered into our system, the money, and then it's finalized with DCA accounting.
But one thing that's not represented there is a Department of Consumer Affairs mail room that's made it through the two before it comes to our desk.
This is a paper.
It's a paper application.
And then once we get past the administrative part of sending in your application, the next is exam eligibility. I put this here because we are advising the students to apply for licensure at the same time they register for the exam. As you'll see through the application process, this may occur even before these things or after these things, but for just the sake of presentation, I'm putting it here. And then the application is acknowledged, so we let the applicant know we've received it, and then it'll go to the analyst to be reviewed. But at least they know at that point that the office has it. Then it goes to evaluation, and this is where the analyst verify all of the documents are complete and meet the requirements. And then after that, if there's any deficiencies, the analyst will work with the applicant to fulfill them and get all of the information that's necessary. And then we issue the license. So as far as processing time, we'll take a look at that. The mail desk has to get through all the mail, and it has to be actually cashiered within 3 business days. The reason the cashiering is showing 7 business days is because that's after it's been cashiered and then it's gone through accounting and then it comes back to our unit. So we're looking at 2 weeks potentially before our program even has the opportunity or even has access to that application, if it's a paper application. Now, if it's sent in through Breeze, that does not exist. That part does not exist. The application comes directly to our program. Exam eligibility, that's a recent change. So as soon as an applicant registers for an exam, they will be made eligible within 3 business days. Now this is an update when I'm talking about streamlining processes and taking advantage of efficiencies. It used to be that the application had to be reviewed and the exam eligibility was part of that review process, which could take 30 days or more depending on the workload that existed. Now, exam eligibility is processed differently, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So what this does, it allows the applicant to move forward with their exam process, schedule their exam while we're taking a look at their application, rather than making them wait for that process. And then the application acknowledgement happens 2 weeks from the date that our program receives it. The evaluation is 30 days from the acknowledgement. And then deficiencies, there's a question mark there because is going to be however long it takes the applicant to fulfill any outstanding requirements. And then the issuance of a license, we have 45 days, and that's to address busier workload periods. If it's not so busy, it can take substantially less time. But let's say we have a lot of applicants going through a busy exam, we cannot get, like one of the busiest quarters last fiscal year, there's about 600 applicants. We can't issue 600 licenses as well as process additional incoming applications. It takes some time. So that's what that time frame is for.
Sarah?
Yes.
How do you know someone's eligible to take the exam?
Okay. The current process, that's a recent change, is that the Federation of State Boards has an interface for the board to go in and access, and the schools actually will verify that they are within 90 days of graduation. Once they do that and the applicant has registered and paid, we will be able to access their record and then grant them eligibility. And we'll see that a little bit more later on. So these are our processing times for the board. So I want to show you how that looks in comparison to the exam processing times and deadlines that's established by the Federation. So you'll see here, if the applicant or the student applies 90 days prior to graduation, which is what we're advising them to do, a lot of the board process can occur before they sit for the national exam. So this is a benefit to the applicant in that, and to the board, is we're kind of using their downtime between registering and sitting for the exam to do all of our work. So hopefully by the time they get to their national exam, they'll be ready for licensure, and there won't be any additional follow-up required, and they can just go to be issued a license. Now, if we look at applications submitted on Breeze, that even shortens the time. So just greater efficiency. Now we do have other cases. Let's say someone doesn't apply this early. And here I say the student applies 4 weeks prior to exam, which is the cutoff from the Federation as to when the jurisdictions can actually approve eligibility. And that's something I hadn't mentioned yet. So the Federation has deadlines in place that they need about a month prior to the exam for the board to say, yes, these people are eligible. That has to happen 30 days before the exam. So that's not our deadline, that's the Federation's. So we actually have to stop our work 30 days prior to an exam. But we do have, and I say unlikely, but it's more not common. It has happened where an applicant may have registered for an exam and not realized they need to send in an application, or just didn't understand the process. So what we can do is advise them we'll advise them to apply on Breeze because that's quicker. But this will show that we can still get some things done prior to their exam and a little bit after. And there's just Breeze that it will be. But it's still putting them in a good position to be licensed, pretty timely. And then we've gone over the process and the time frame. Some of the activities that go into the application processing is that we have to enter information into the system. If applicants apply online, they are doing a lot of the entry for us, but we still do need to go in and make sure that information is complete and verify it. We do have to evaluate the application and supporting documentation. We grant eligibility, issue licensed applicant status, license individuals, emails, and phone calls. And so these are all the things that are being done on a daily basis. And when you times this, times the number of applications, which was, about 2,700 last fiscal year, that's a lot of work that's involved with the application processing. Oh, and then just like the arrows here, these activities are continuous. So like I had talked about earlier, we don't get to go through the exam and just issue licenses, and then, the next group of applications will come in. It's we're continually receiving applications while we're processing the other applications all the way through to licensure. So it's just, it keeps going. So with that, I'll go on to the application process itself, and this is information that has been presented to the students. An important part of the application process is that really it starts before they apply to the board. I think of it like painting, or 80% of your work is preparation, the rest of it's the easy part. So the first thing that the students need to do is they need to be within 90 days of graduating from an CAPD accredited program. And I'm sorry I failed to mention that this information is all for graduates of CAPD accredited programs. And exam applicants, not those licensees that are coming from other states that already hold a license. The school must confirm that the graduation with the federation, and that's, like we talked about, allows the board to grant their eligibility. So this is, I wanted to talk about how graduation is validated. So there's two ways graduation is validated. One's for exam eligibility and one is for licensure with the board. So the school will validate graduation through FSBPT for the exam. And this is done prior to board application. Now, for licensure, the board still needs this document, the Certificate of Completion, or P1E, and this actually is submitted to the board after the applicant has completed their program after graduation to verify that they have graduated. Because what's done in FSBPT doesn't confirm that the student has actually graduated. It says it may be the case, depending on the school, because the school may say, no, I'm not going to confirm until after. But if the school's willing to confirm that the student's going to graduate, we have nothing to show that that actually happened. And that's where the certificate of completion comes in. And this is just to go over some of the requirements. So, as I said, it can't be completed until after the coursework and clinical internships are done. And so that's where you can see those requirements on the form. And then, I've talked about all these points that can be submitted after the application is sent in. And right now, we're working on having, at least in California, the schools send the P1Es directly to us. We're finding that it does help. And then because ideally we already have the application. When the schools complete their programs, we get all the P1Es and just put them with the applications. And we're finding that is working very well. The other things that the students need to do is prepare for application and the exam. So we ask that they go over the information on the website, look at the process, look at the requirements, the study guides for both the national exam and the law exam, and look at what's required of them. We get a lot of, we work with a lot of applicants who seem surprised by what's expected of them. So we ask that they prepare themselves for application even before they need to apply. Oh, and that QR code is for the California law exam. So we ask that students, if they have a smartphone and they can read the QR code, they can get the law exam on their phone, or the study guide on their phone. Fingerprinting needs to happen before the application. It makes everything a lot easier. We do advise that the students do everything within the month that they apply. So 30 days, within 30 days of submitting an application, take your live scan form, to an operator, have that done. They need to make sure that they're fingerprinted by both DOJ and FBI. If there's any issue with that, the board cannot fix it. They have to go back to the operator. They have to keep a copy for themselves. They can upload it to Breeze now. So it used to be they had to submit one to the board, one original, and then keep one, but that's changed with a lot of electronic submissions. Now, another thing we tell the students is, this comes up a lot, they ask, if I've already fingerprinted for another agency, do I have to do it for the board? And yes, they do, because when you fingerprint, you're giving the board the permission to access your criminal, your background information. If we don't have that, if you don't give us that authority, then we won't have access to that information, which is necessary to ensure that you're safe to practice. And the board does have the authority to do a background check based on fingerprinting in BCP 144, and it actually requires it. Now the photo requirement, we do show that these are examples of what not to do. We do need a passport style photo, so you do not have to submit an actual passport photo, but it needs to be similar to those requirements. So we just show them examples of what not to do and then what it should look like, and then to take the photo within 30 days. Excuse me. Again, this is just to have current information at the time of application. And we do tell them that if they submit a photo like the first batch, that we'll use it in these presentations. The next part is military service. So for members of the military who served in active duty and were honorably discharged, they can request expedited service if they provide evidence of that. And reasonable accommodations for the exam. This is offered by the board. It's a form that we actually require because it has all the information we need, because we can't provide those testing accommodations if we don't know what's needed. The applicant will need to submit this form to the board. It's part of it has to be completed by the applicant, and the other part is by a person licensed to diagnose whatever the condition is that the individual has. And then also, when they register for their exam through the Federation, they need to indicate that they're requesting accommodations so that the board and the Federation can coordinate those accommodations. And we ask that the students actually submit this information early, 2 weeks prior to applying. That way, we have the information we need to make them eligible. Because if we ask them to apply and register at the same time, so if we already have this on file, then we can grant their eligibility when they register. And criminal history records, this is one of the 2 items that cannot be submitted online. We actually do need certified records, so if anybody does have history to disclose on their application, we advise them to get all of this information. They do need to be certified records and get them in ahead of time, because if they don't, then the board will be asking for them. So either way, they're going to have to be provided. It's easier if it's early with the application. And then registering for the exams. So this is a screenshot of FSBPT's or the Federation's candidate services. And there it says exam registration and payment. So we ask that the applicants register for both the exams, the national and the law exam, prior to applying, and they can do that online. Now, something I didn't mention earlier is that for the students to access these services, they have to have an account with the Federation, and they get that account actually even earlier, like when they start their program. So when they start their program, the school actually registers them with the Federation, and then the students are notified via email that their account has been started. The student then goes in and finishes the account, and now they're ready to go. Now they can access all of these services, and so they should be established by the time they get to the point of registering for the exam. and then they submit their application on Breeze. And that's pretty easy. So, like I said, everything can be submitted online. All the documents can be uploaded and attached. And like I said, the applicants doing an online application provide a lot of efficiencies. It reduces processing time for them, and it does a lot of the data entry for our board. So the more applications we receive online, I think we'll see a bigger impact in our processing times. Right now, we still don't have that big of a population that's doing online to see that impact, I think. So some general information. The preferred method of communication is email. We are moving to all electronic communication. It's quicker, and the students, a lot of them, have their phones, they have their email right there. It's easier for them. So that's the way we go, unless there's a request for some reason to do regular mail. The application is acknowledged and evaluated after payment processing. We do get questions that, oh, my check has been cashed, I haven't heard anything, I just want to check in. And we have, because of the requirements of processing payments so quickly, we do have to make sure that money is processed before we can look at the application. So I want them to be aware of that. Eligibility is processed if the registration and payment is with the Federation. Sometimes registration's there, but not payment. We need both. And then we ask the applicants review all the communication from the board and respond to any requests. It's pretty simple and straightforward, but I think that it's forgotten sometimes that the communications we send out, oftentimes we'll get, well, I got that, but, what do I do? And a lot of times the instructions are in the communication. You just have to take the time to take a look at it. Now, as far as the exam, so we've gone through the process. We've prepped for the application, submitted the application, had the communications. Now, when the applicants are ready to take the exam, there's the national exam, which is 250 questions, 5 hours, 5 sections of 50 questions. 50 of them don't count because they're test questions for potential future use. It's $400 for the exam, and applicants are limited to taking the exam 3 times per 12-month period. If they happen to have hit that maximum, they'd have to wait till that 12-month period is over, and it's rolling. It's not like a calendar year or a fiscal year. It's just from the first exam they took. The next exam is the California Law Exam, and it tests the knowledge of the laws and regulations specific to practice of physical therapy in California. The law exam is continuous, whereas the national exam is fixed date testing. So the national exam is only offered 4 times a year, whereas the law exam is offered continuously. So we would like if possible, if the students feel ready, would like them to take the law exam before they take their national exam, while they're waiting, because that's one more thing they can get done with their application, and then the national exam would be the last deficiency. It costs $65 to the Federation, $25 to the testing center. It's often, even though it's a state exam, it is offered nationwide, and the study guide is offered by the board. All the study materials for the national exam are offered by the Federation. Another aspect of application processing is licensed applicant status. This is a privilege that allows applicants to practice while they're waiting to take their exam. And they have to meet certain requirements. So they have to have a completed P1E. So we can't go off of the graduation validation through the Federation because they may not have graduated. We actually need the P1E before we can issue licensed applicant status. If an applicant has criminal history, that needs to be considered before it's granted. So we would need fingerprint responses. if PTLA or if license applicant status is granted, there's a letter issued via email to allow the applicant to practice, and they will provide that information to their supervising physical therapist. And they are able to practice in that status for 120 days, pending the results of their first exam attempt. If they are successful at that first exam attempt, then they can continue to practice under that status until they're issued a regular license. Now, license applicant status the applicant will lose it if it's been more than 120 days and they have not taken their exam, if they fail the national exam, or if it's been issued and the board is notified of criminal history that was not disclosed. In some cases, with the criminal history review above, license applicant status may not be granted if there's concern that that person's is not safe to be exposed to a consumer.
Sarah,
Mhm.
once they lose the PTLA, it's only issued once, right?
Yes. That's correct. Yes, thank you. The license applicant status is only good one time in a lifetime. So even if someone was to hold a license here in California, say it cancels, they reapply, they will not get license applicant status again. It is only issued once pending your first exam. And there are supervision requirements. A license applicant status must be under direct and immediate supervision. I just wanted to include this. Some of the communication that we have with individuals, that this may not be clear. A lot of individuals want their PTLA so they can work. We do get that, I think, more from licensees who are coming from out of state. But, we want students to be aware that this is not a temporary license. This is not, you don't get to just freely practice independently. You do have specific supervision requirements. And then hopefully you take the exam and then pass. But as far as exam results, those are available through the Federation, through that account that's been established with, with the Federation. The board does not provide exam results. They have to get them online. The students have to get them online. And that's pretty straightforward. And then after that, hopefully all the deficiencies are fulfilled and a license is issued. And the first licensure period is between 13 and 24 months, depending on your birth date and the month that you are licensed. And this initial licensure period that's what the initial license fee is for. It's not actually for the wallet license that you get. It's actually for the time that you will be practicing between getting your initial license and renewing for the first time. And I think that is all I have as far as the presentation. Can we get the lights on? I just want a couple notes. Oh. Huh? That's it? Yeah. So something, I know earlier there was some discussion about transparency, and that's something, all this information we are doing a lot of outreach on, and we're really trying to make I think TJ used a term, not so secretive or not mysterious. Thank you all. And not make the application process so mysterious. I think that's some of the feedback that we've gotten. So not only are we trying to streamline these processes, making it easier for the board as well as applicants, but also to really make it clear to the applicant. So this information, it is new. I'm happy that the board got to see it today. It will be on our website. All of the information is going to be updated soon, hopefully. So that's something that it's really important that we're working on. And then just again, all of these efficiencies that we're working on, we are making sure that it's not taking away from the consumer protection part of it. That is obviously our first, our primary mandate, our priority, and these things are just secondary to that. So with that, I am done. Question? Do you want to do questions like this, or do you want to go back up? Okay.
for that presentation. What questions or comments do you have?
A question. There was a period of time when the Federation was very security concerned, not that they're not now, but they even didn't want people who might potentially be disqualified from licensure due to something in their past before they wanted them even to be exposed to the exam. And not, is that still in the loop of the state providing eligibility, or might you provide eligibility before you have DOJ and FBI?
Eligibility can occur before fingerprint results are received, and that would be the case in other states. So if you remember, we talked about alternate pathway for eligibility, which allows applicants to sit for the exam prior to licensure in some states. And if that was the case, then a background check wouldn't exist for that eligibility process. And it's my understanding that not all states do a background check. So that assurance isn't there nationwide. So in this case, it wouldn't be different than those processes.
My brain's fuzzy on what the alternate pathway that was discussed, but I thought we determined kind of we couldn't do it or it didn't fit California. Remind me what the difference is between this.
Essentially, that the difference is that my staff is doing it, not FSBPT's. So alternate pathway as a service provided by FSBPT, they would be doing this screening. And as they offer that product to other jurisdictions, California is not able to access that particular product because we can't adhere to their eligibility requirements. There's a conflict in legislation, the 6-time lifetime ban, the too low score limit, those kind of things. So while alternate pathway for FSBPT is a West Coast idea, we're not able to actually access it. So what we're trying to do is mimic it as closely as we can. And yeah, there was a concern at one time, especially after the cheating scandal, that there was, if a board provided eligibility to an exam to an applicant who might otherwise be denied a license, then we may have unintentionally or unnecessarily disclosed that exam to someone. I think it's clear now, though, with alternate pathway being adopted by other jurisdictions in other states, that concern is no longer one of FSBPT's. And I think our move, while we've done this for quite a while now, doing eligibility the way we're doing today, we removed the actual fingerprint requirement for eligibility over a year ago to try and expedite the purpose or the process for applicants and not unnecessarily burden them and create a backlog. This is just one more step of efficiency to say, if FSBPT is willing to make them eligible on their internet portal, we're going to take that information and use it for eligibility and eligibility purposes only, while we still need the certificate of completion for things like PTLA or the issuance of a license. But to get into the exam, FSBPT is taking the information directly from the schools. And so we kind of are too.
So with the conflict with California as far as like the lifetime bans, what would happen with a California applicant that went to Federation and has that, it maybe hits that ban? What's going to happen with their application? Does it go ahead and come through to California?
No. So because FSBPT is not actually providing alternate pathway services to us, they're still going to put that registration into the system, which our staff will have to look at in the application process and make them eligible for that 7th or 8th or 9th attempt. So because when an applicant applies or registers with FSBPT, they indicate which jurisdiction that they're wanting to apply to. When they check that California box, it changes the way the process works on the FSBPT side of the website and just says, yeah, they can take a 7th and an 8th.
Good. That's what I wanted to make sure.
Yep.
Can I just add something really quickly? I think another important thing with the eligibility is that, or with Federation security, is that the school initiates the registration through the Federation. The applicant completes it, that's the only way to get access to this system. So those individuals that are getting eligibility and have access to the Federation and the exam it's very narrow. It's to only those students who, well, initially are registered, have started a program, and then those registering for the exam have completed or are within 90 days of completing their physical therapy program. So it's just the access is not out there for anyone. It's very, very narrow.
Absolutely. As soon as we essentially combine the FSBPT database with the CAPTI database through the schools, that eliminated the outside influence. That eliminated those people registering for the exam who don't even have an application on file, which is why there's an eligibility process to begin with. FSBPT wants to know where you're licensing or where you're being licensed from before they'll even give you access. So California says, yay, we have everything on file. This person's good to take the exam. That database combination of both CAPTI and FSBPT has alleviated that requirement.
I have a couple questions for you, Sarah, and thank you for that presentation. I thought it was really timely, like you said, to present that to the full board, considering all of the changes that have occurred in the application process. My first question is, do you know the percentage of paper applications to Breeze applications?
I believe we were about 40% of Breeze applications.
That's great.
So recently, that's what we were looking at.
And
so.
I'm sure steadily increasing over time.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. And how much time, on average, would it take for somebody who has completed all of the application requirements, who sat for the exam and passed the national exam, before they would be issued a license beyond that, considering everything was done and complete by that point?
It's about 3 months.
Okay.
And it's just, we can't move much faster than that with just administrative processing time and then fixed date testing. And then it's just, the process doesn't allow for much quicker. Unless in the case of applicants who are already licensed out of state. So those individuals, if they've already taken the law exam, they could potentially be licensed upon their initial review, which is 30 days after their application has been received.
Okay.
And that 3 months is start to finish, right? But assuming that all deficiencies have been met, what is the timeline until a license could be issued from there?
So yeah, that, you mean if it was complete, that's where that, like, the out-of-state licenses would be. So it would be the 2-week processing time, 30 days, so potentially that 45 days.
Okay.
Depending on workload, sometimes give or take, but about that.
Thank you.
Sarah, so the $400 cost for the test and the 3 attempts, of course, that's included in the $400 initial.
The exam cost is each time they sit for the exam.
Okay.
And then that's just for the exam. We do have our own costs.
And after 3 attempts, let's say the student still doesn't pass, is there a time period where they have to wait before they can try again?
So if they are within their 12-month period, they'll have to wait until that ends. So they can't take 4 exams in 12 months. If that period has passed, they can sit for the exam again. And how the fixed date tests opportunities are spread out across the year, most applicants, if they need to take the exam more than that, they're not stopped by that 12-month period because of the way the exams are spread out over the year. But if they don't complete their application, they may have to reapply with the board.
Sarah, I have a quick question because I get a few requests from licensees from other states that have applied for licensure in California, and the context is that they're participating in some of our residency programs. So what would be best case scenario, 30 days? And how about on the other end
30
of that?
to 45.
Okay. And as far out as? Not much more than 45 with deficiencies?
Well, it depends on the deficiency that's involved. So let's say they apply and they haven't taken the law exam.
Got it.
Then they have to wait for that, or it could be a situation of fingerprinting. That's where, if there's any deficiency, including the exam, it's really hard to tell.
So that's the wild card. Okay, thank you.
That's why we're really trying to get this information out so that people can be prepared in getting everything they need to us, because that seems to be the disconnect of, what do you need? And I think there used to be a hesitation in telling applicants, you need to do this, because there are a lot of variables. People may there are options in applying. You can do things differently. So we were hesitant to say, do this, because you could do all of this. But I think what we're doing is giving them direction, because that's what everyone's asking for. What does the board want us to do? It's like, okay, well, here's what we would like to see. Here's what will be efficient for both of us. And then if you need to do something different as an applicant, then you can go from there. But at least you have some direction.
Does Breeze provide like a place where they can go check the status?
So, kind of. We're still working on that. Right now, with the way the system is set up, the applicant can see that their application has been accepted. Anything beyond that is not available at this point. We are working on that, though. So at least they'll know we have it, and then the rest of the communication is via email.
One of the things that Sarah focused on twice, really, was where your questions led to 30 days. She was hesitant and said 45, right? We've streamlined this process to that breaking point where we know that date. We know that date very well. And the only thing that we can do past this point to improve on that date is, like Sarah alluded to in her presentation, add an additional analyst to split the workload, or streamline the process further. And I can tell you in brainstorming, we don't have any other ideas on how to streamline the process further. So we're at that kind of magic point now. Well, there's still always some opportunity for slight fine tuning, but the major steps to be made have been found. Those efficiencies are there now. The unfortunate part is a lot of this is also applicant dependent. Their participation, their performance in the application process. So those deficiencies, because of what may be misinformation or a misunderstanding of information, can lead to a delayed application process. And that goes with the endorsement candidates from other states as well. And the unfortunate part about that is there's nothing in the education that they receive as being a physical therapist that's required to teach them how to apply for the state of California. Right? There's a vacuum there that we're trying to fill through that outreach campaign. And one of the things that we've advised schools to do is try to, one, influence their students to use the Breeze system because it's to their benefit, but also the P1Es to be managed by the school and sent in bulk for a graduating class instead of handing them out individually to students. So the best advice we can give, and we've seen benefits from it when it's used. We'll keep giving it, and hopefully we'll get a better saturation. The percentage of Breeze applications, about 40, almost 45%. It's pretty good, and it's going to get better. But from what we understand in the department and from OIS is we have a really high percentage compared to a lot of other boards. When it comes to Breeze participation, that's the room for improvement. The applicants are our demographic. The licensees were already at like 80 to 90% renewals on Breeze, right? So the word has spread in the licensing population. It's really the school systems that we have to get to the applicants and move them towards that area.
Yeah, I think updating the information online, I'm really excited about that because I think that will really, really help. I think when people know what's expected, then that'll fill that gap. The information is so important. And some of the changes that we're doing are like checklists. Here's what you need before. Here's what you need to submit. Here's what you can do online. Things like that, just very clear of our expectation. And I think for processing time, the other part of that is we can only move so fast in that we've talked about with Breeze before. It is also a record-keeping system. So for us to have good records, we need to take the time. You do have to upload documents. You have to record the information. You have to make sure it's all there. And that takes time. So there is an element that we can't move any faster.
Yeah, the processing of the in-house paper application in Breeze is actually slower than the previous legacy systems because we're entering that much more detail on the information straight into the system, where with the legacy system we were able to rely on the paper application. So we only put the essentials into the electronic part of the system and we relied on the file. Pull the file, get your information. Pull the file, get your information now resides in the file system in Breeze. So a lot more data entry on staff's part.
Just anecdotally, I think we have slowly implemented some of these changes. And just the feedback I've gotten from our team members that the questions that they're receiving are more direct. It's not just how to apply. It's like, okay, I understand this, but what about this piece? Or it's just the conversations are going better. And this is even before we've updated the website information. So I think this direction is positive, and I'm hoping that that can continue.
I found this presentation extremely helpful, and I'd be interested in seeing one potentially at a future board meeting about foreign educated applicants.
I'm glad, because one of the things that I was thinking about is I hope that the presentation helps you all with the decisions you make with, your policies and how to approach different issues that may come up in regards to this. As when we talk about workload and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Sarah. Any further questions from the board?
Did you have any questions on the data that was in your packet?
Just a comment. The first chart there for applications received, it just jumps out that the foreign educated PT population has really decreased. I think 50%.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's consistent with what I've heard from FSBPT as well, that there's a big drop going on right now, and I guess because of the political climate or what have you. Yeah.
Without getting too much into that, I think it would be higher. So I don't know.
One of the things to keep in mind is one of those eligibility requirements that FSBPT has imposed is that foreign applicants are evaluated on the current coursework tool.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of states have adopted that, and the word has spread in that community as well. It's more difficult for them. They're going to be found to be deficient for those states and have to go back to school to fulfill those deficiencies. So
Yeah, it's hard to do. Okay.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I did want to point something out on your document. You will see the FPT and FPTA have been changed to NAPT and NAPTA, and that's just changing our reference we're moving from foreign, referring to these individuals as foreign educated, to graduates of non-accredited programs. So that's the reason for the change there. All right.
That term also, though, includes graduates of programs that have not yet been CAPTI accredited that are inside the United States, correct?
Yeah, so thank you for pointing that out. So these would be individuals that graduate from non-accredited programs outside the U.S. So that statistic would not be for those people that have graduated from non-accredited programs inside the U.S.
Dr. Alvisa was just commenting to me about how valuable that information would be for a newsletter, about what information could be included as well about graduating from an accredited program versus a non-accredited program.
I wasn't even sly.
There was no intention of slyness at all.
Okay, any further board comments on the data presented? Any public comment? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's move to agenda item number 25. Consumer Protection Services. Christy?
Hi, I'm Christy Livermento, Enforcement Analyst. I have the briefing paper for the Consumer Services Protection Program. For Attachment 1, that is our enforcement performance measures. That report is provided by the department and has not yet been provided to us. They do hope to have that for you for the next board meeting, though. Attachment 2 is our Consumer Protection Services report. This report provides detailed information in certain areas of the enforcement program, includes year-end statistics in comparison to last fiscal year. For fiscal year 2017-2018, quarter 2, we had a total of 118 complaint cases that were closed within the target rate of 90 days, which is up 5% from last year at this time fiscal year. We also, the average number of days to complete an enforcement case which was transmitted to the AG's office increased, which includes both the board investigation and the AG process. This reflects an increase of 11% compared to this time of last year, and that's likely because of the lengthy in-house investigations. And then also attachment 3, we've provided a disciplinary summary list for all discipline actions, and that was starting in October 2017 through December of 2017.
Thank you. Any discussion by the board?
I would just point out if attachment 1, which is the performance measures that you're used to seeing from the Department of Consumer Affairs, are of interest to you, there is a way to kind of extrapolate that data from attachment 2. Essentially, we report that data to the department. The department compiles it along with other boards and bureaus and publishes what we are using for attachment 1. So you get that information anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's available to you.
Thank you. Yes. Any public comment? Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
And agenda item number 26, probation monitoring.
Good afternoon, board members.
Good afternoon.
I'm Monty Martin, probation monitor. Today I'm reporting on the second quarter stats for fiscal year 2017-18 for probation monitoring. And if you refer to agenda item 24, attachment A1, those statistics are provided there in a spreadsheet for you. There are currently 89 licensees on probation within California, or just total for various reasons. 79 of those licensees are practicing within California, and there are 10 additional licensees on probation outside of the state, which are not currently gaining credit toward the completion of their probation. If you look at the chart, you will see that in the quarter 3, licensees entered into probation or started probation. 7 licensees completed probation in the quarter, and 1 licensee violated their probation in the quarter and was referred back to the Deputy Attorney General's office for discipline. Of the 79 licensees that are currently still in California, 20 are enrolled in the board's drug and alcohol monitoring program, equaling about 25% of the licensees on probation in California. In the quarter, there were no people or no licensees that entered into the alcohol and drug rehab program. 1 probationer completed that program, and 22 total participants were served within the quarter. And 1 person was determined to be clinically inappropriate for that program, so they were not required to participate in it after being diagnosed or clinically. With that being said, I believe that is it. Oh, actually, yeah, that's it. Any questions?
Any comments?
I'm struggling a little bit with the report. I just want to make sure that, 'cause it looks to me like we're not actually comparing the right numbers. So when we're looking at year-to-date for fiscal year 2017-2018, we're just looking at 2 quarters.
Yeah, so those
Comparing that
year-to-year changes wouldn't be accurate because I believe that's for the entire year, not just for the quarters.
Right. Okay. So the decrease of 42% in entered probationer status isn't really. It's potentially
missing
not.
it's
truly
missing
accurate.
2 quarters
Missing
of
2 quarters,
information.
okay. Thank you.
I just want to say I like the presentation of the raw numbers. It's just kind of nice to know these things. It's
Okay. If you guys have questions or want to know more, just please let me know and I can get those numbers for you.
okay. Thank you. Any public comment? Thank you, Monty.
Thank you.
Okay. So we have a closed session coming up, but we also have public comment of items not on the agenda. Yes? Oh, I'm sorry, we didn't do that. Kind of looked at the charts but didn't hear the official report. Yeah. So back to agenda item 24.
Hello, my name is Yura Trent. I'm the program license analyst with the applications and licensing.
Sorry to interrupt. Can we clarify which agenda item we're moving back to?
24. Thank you.
So I'm just going to go over some of the licensing stats. But I do want to make a correction. In the second paragraph on the last line, it says for July 1st, 2017 through December 1st, 2017, it should be December 31st.
Oh.
So the licensing, active licenses have increased by 4%, and inactive license have decreased by 9%, and then there's an increase in the retired licenses issued by 70%, and the overall renewals have increased for about 7% from last year. And since the Breeze online program has the licensees use that Breeze to renew their licenses, there's been a decrease in our in-house renewal payments, but that doesn't affect our workload. It just affects some of the cashiering services. And just to give you an idea of the numbers, so last quarter, or the second quarter, there's a total of 7,752 renewal transactions that were processed. Mm-hmm. And the ones that were processed online was a total of 6,214. So it's like 80%, like
Mm-hmm.
Jason said. And so very good. That's all I have.
Nice. What questions or comments might you have for Yura? Any public comment? Thank you, Yura.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anything, Dr. Alviso?
Well, kind of. Tell me. I know.
Just kidding.
It's just like one of my favorite things to do. I just let you almost get it wrong. You said that the renewals online doesn't really change the workload.
No. So it changes like how the money is processed,
Mm-hmm.
because when they pay online, it's direct pay kind of, so it's instant. It updates their license renewal instantly.
Yes.
Instead of having to go to, when they mail in their payment, it has to go to the cashiering, goes to DCA for processing, which takes 6 to 8 weeks. But we still have other stuff that we do online, like for licensing, like changing address changes, any updates, name changes, all those things still are part of licensing. We just don't manage the money part as much.
Okay. So it changes it.
Money.
Yeah, I mean, you normally before that, didn't you have to process those?
No, it goes, I guess it would go to, thank you.
I'm going to add a little bit. So, yes, it doesn't, the cashiering workload is different, but there could be a deficiency with the renewal. So let's say a question wasn't answered or something of that nature, then we still process those things in-house. So there's still a workload associated with renewals, just not the cashiering part of it.
Yeah, I think what Yura means to say when she said the workload doesn't change doesn't mean that Breeze hasn't provided that additional efficiency, because it certainly has. I mean, letting them go through the portal, that 80% is much easier for us administratively. But just because they go through the portal doesn't mean that they're trouble-free. There's still some
Yeah.
troubleshooting that comes out the other side that we have to deal with. And then on top of that, for license maintenance, name changes, duplicate requests, those kind of things are still also processed in-house with Breeze as a supplement also.
Which was one of my questions, for like address changes, is that done completely in Breeze? Or does a staff member still have to touch that?
Both. It can be on Breeze. There's actually multiple ways to do it. You can do it on Breeze, and it can be done through an address change transaction. It can also be done through any other transaction you do. So if you're renewing your license, you can also update your address. So in the statistics, it doesn't capture those address changes that are done,
Somewhere else.
through other transactions. You can also submit, and licensees still do. They still fax in address changes. We still get a lot of in-house address changes.
Yeah, mailed handwritten letters, fax, email. I mean, so paper application received in snail mail, those kind of things. We haven't limited that access yet, and so we still have that part of the workload. And because of maybe the lack of knowledge regarding Breeze and what it might provide, there's a good portion of the licensing population that still relies on paper because it's what they've always done.
So I think then would it be proper to say that it obviously doesn't eliminate the work, it changes it some and allows you to maybe do the things that really take analytical work, specific problem solving, but not so much of the rote.
Yes, I would concur with that.
Okay.
Because if there's no issue with the renewal, then there is no follow-up required by us. But I just don't want to lose that. I don't want to lose sight that it's not requiring any of our time because there's still a pull. Yeah, I don't want it to come across that way.
And Yura's comment to that regard is correct in the sense that the good majority of those applicants for renewal, if they hadn't had Breeze, they would have used the online the coupon system that would have went through the RPA processor at DCA, which we didn't do in-house, but we always received whatever needed to be troubleshooted. So switching that 80% to Breeze hasn't really changed the flow we receive because it was either at central cashiering being processed by the coupon through the mail or now online.
That makes sense.
We still get the problem children.
Yeah.
Does Breeze give you any information yet on how many of those end up needing something from you?
Potentially. So we could get that information. I don't have it right now.
Okay.
It's like the percentage of deficient applications. I don't have that right now.
Okay.
But we can get that.
Or does the Breeze, like renewals I'm just thinking about, would it stop me through the process?
Yes.
Okay, so it stops me through it. And so you would know how many stops occurred.
Oh.
What do you
like
mean?
if I'm trying to think of how a renewal process would end up needing something from you.
So how it normally happens is a licensee submits their renewal. If they're eligible, if there's anything stopping them from renewal, they won't be able to do it on Breeze. Or if a fine is due, it'll prompt them to complete that. So the requirements will all be due at the time of renewal. Now, where we come in is if they don't respond to a question. That's pretty much it, but that does happen quite often. So they miss.
And some of the most significant troubleshooting through the Breeze system that we need is somebody that's checked, yes, I have been convicted. So that essentially goes to CPS to be investigated. Or we do get calls where they checked inactive status in Breeze, but they did that accidentally, and now they're calling back to follow up, and they need to have that switched. And so there's some correspondence that goes back and forth. But we had that.
One. We actually get quite a bit of contacts for that reason. Check the wrong button.
And in the design of the system, they couldn't not check something. So we tried to stop that part from happening. So we wouldn't get an incomplete application that they didn't indicate either way whether they had been or had not been convicted of a crime. They have to choose one. And that solves that problem, but it doesn't solve the problem of them making a mistake and filling it out incorrectly.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other further discussion? Public comment? Thank you, Yura. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, now we can look at agenda item 27 and any public comment on items not on the agenda. Hearing none. How about agenda item number 28, agenda items for future meetings?
I have in my notes here the request for a presentation on foreign educated applicants and that process, I think would be helpful. And what do we do in the case where people come, like they did yesterday, and ask for us to review their application to be considered a program?
So the board has received that request and is processing it now. And it's a little bit awkward the way this played out, a little unusual, but essentially we have to determine whether or not we even have the authority to do that. So while the statute states one thing, the regulation has more clarity and more specificity, and so we're looking at whether we can provide them with an answer. Once that happens, the board president will have to designate whether or not she believes it's a priority to be brought to the board's attention and agendized for a future meeting.
And does that open up the floodgates for people to bypass the CAPT process if we accept one individual?
Yeah, it very well could.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
Just curious.
If I may,
I'll say one more thing though, so
Yeah.
if you don't mind.
please do.
I very much do feel that the spirit or the intent of the legislation that says the board can entertain requests really meant from another entity that was willing to serve the same role that CAPT does, another accrediting body, and that accrediting body would have to adhere to the same standards that CAPT was.
So before we go too far into this, we are in the agenda item of just future agenda item.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we don't want to get too far along into this conversation. But I think with regards to future meeting agenda items, we are looking into whether this could potentially end up on a future agenda for the board to consider that request. And so if it does need to go before the board and it's not something that's delegated to staff to make the decision, then it will probably end up on a future agenda.
Any other future agenda items?
The next meeting that's listed is the next business meeting, but the April 12th strategic plan, I think there was discussion about possibly including a short closed session. I don't know if it had to be in closed session regarding the EO evaluation and the assignments. I don't know if it has to be in closed session or not, but we talked about April 12th being possibly when we could determine.
I don't know now, after hearing the explanation from Chris Castrillo and legal counsel's explanation as well, that that's necessary. That assignment can occur from Alicia, direct contact to each member, but it sounds like there might be some changes being given to us by DCA in the process of how that works, whether it's done electronically or whatnot. So we'll wait to hear from them before we make that determination.
I have a question just to clarify what the strategic planning meeting is going to look like. Is it a business meeting where we will be at dais like this that will be recorded, et cetera?
No. So
or will it be more of a working style meeting?
It's very much a working meeting. I would recommend, business casual attire for comfort because we're going to work you. We're going to be not in a dais setting. We'll be in the Lake Tahoe room with conference room style tables. Solid will be in attendance to facilitate that. And it's very much an activity-based meeting, and we'll try to provide you the environmental analysis as quickly as we can. We're still waiting to receive it from Solid, but once we get it, staff will go through it and then create that draft and provide it to you in advance of the April 12th date.
Thank you very much.
Any other ideas for agenda items? Okay, and so at this time, we're going to move into closed session. And after closed session, we'll open just to adjourn the meeting.
I don't think you need to open to adjourn.
You just make the announcement that we'll be adjourning.
All right, well, we'll be adjourning afterward. Okay, and the time is 3:49. Thank you.